I was halfway through cleaning fish on the back deck when I heard gravel crunching in the driveway. Again. I looked up just in time to see a tow truck backing toward my dock, its engine growling like it owned the place. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, wiping my hands on a rag. I jogged up the path from the dock, past the boathouse, and caught sight of her Regina Alder, the HOA president with a clipboard clutched in her perfectly manicured claws, standing there like a parking lot warden with a vendetta. "Regina," I called out. "What the hell is this?" She turned, all pearls and pastel rage. "Xander Nolan, your boat is in violation. Per HOA Clause 11.2, no large vessels may be stored on personal property in view of the street." I blinked. "You mean the 30-foot fishing boat I keep docked behind my house on my private waterfront property?" "Yes," she snapped. "It's an eyesore. Residents are complaining." I looked past her at the tow truck which, by the way, had no business being on my land, then back at her. "You do realize the dock is mine. The boat's in the water. That's not street visible, and this is a waterfront zone, not a cul-de-sac with lawn gnomes." Regina flipped through her papers like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "It's visual pollution. It devalues the neighborhood aesthetic." I stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Regina, you're trespassing, and so is that tow truck." She ignored me and waved at the driver. "Hook it up," the guy hesitated. He clearly hadn't expected an argument, much less from a 6'2" guy with fish guts on his boots and fire in his eyes. I pulled out my phone. Regina scoffed. "You can call whoever you want. The HOA has jurisdiction to enforce neighborhood standards." I dialed anyway. "Yeah, hi, Harbor Police. I've got someone attempting to tow a legally docked boat off private waterfront property." No, I didn't stutter. Regina's smug face flickered. 10 minutes later, a harbor patrol unit pulled up, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, one of them nodding at me. "Mr. Nolan, can you confirm this is your property and your dock?" I handed him the deed. "Every inch from the street to the bulkhead, including submerged land rights. Bought it 6 years ago." Regina started in. "He's in violation of." The officer cut her off. "Ma'am, this is a navigable waterway. HOA regulations do not supersede state marine law. You have zero authority here." Regina sputtered, but the officer wasn't done. He turned to the tow truck driver. "You're leaving. Now. And if you ever accept an unauthorized tow from this property again, you'll be charged with attempted theft." The driver didn't need a second invitation. He backed out so fast he nearly took out a mailbox. Regina's jaw worked like she was chewing glass. "This isn't over," I grinned. "You're right. It's just getting started." The next morning, I found a yellow violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox, not taped zip-tied, like it was hand-delivered by someone with a point to prove. And there it was in bold red letters. "Final warning. Unauthorized marine equipment must be removed within 48 hours." I pulled it off and read through the boilerplate language, but it was the signature at the bottom that caught my eye. "Approved by Special Session HOA Enforcement Committee." That was new. I'd never heard of a special session before, and I'd attended enough meetings to know they weren't in the bylaws. I tossed the notice onto my workbench and headed inside to fire up my laptop. If they were inventing committees to push their agenda, I needed to dig. 2 hours later, I had something. Hidden in the meeting minutes buried at the bottom of a PDF posted just that morning was a single-line item. "Special session held to address waterfront violations. Temporary enforcement authority granted to President Alder." No votes recorded. No roll call. No witnesses. Just a vague timestamp that didn't even match any scheduled meetings. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just petty overreach anymore. This was procedural fraud. Just then, I heard footsteps on the gravel again. I stepped out onto the porch and saw an unfamiliar guy with a camera slung around his neck, snapping photos of my dock from the sidewalk. "You looking for something?" I called down. He barely acknowledged me. "Just documenting non-compliance for the HOA records." I walked down the steps, boots crunching hard. "You got a name?" He turned, finally making eye contact. Brady Trent. I'm on the HOA's compliance subcommittee, and you're photographing my property without permission. It's public record, he said flatly. Anything visible from the street is fair game. I stepped closer, not threatening, just firm. That dock is behind a privacy hedge. You're leaning over it with a zoom lens. He didn't respond, just turned and walked off, muttering into an earpiece I hadn't noticed before. That's when it clicked he wasn't documenting anything for records. He was building a case, or trying to. I walked back inside and dialed my cousin Ellie. She worked for the county zoning office and had sat through more land use hearings than most judges. Hypothetically, I said, what happens if a homeowners association invents a committee and tries to enforce a rule that contradicts county zoning? Her laugh crackled through the speaker. Hypothetically, they'd be in violation of both the Davis-Sterling Act and Municipal Code, especially if they manufacture authority without due process. And if they try to enforce it anyway, then they're flirting with civil liability. Maybe even criminal, depending on how far they push it. I thanked her and started documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, even the metadata from the PDF. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one with receipts. The next day, I received an email from a law firm out of town. On behalf of the Seacrest HOA, we request your immediate compliance with community standards. Failure to remove non-conforming marine equipment will result in legal action and fines assessed daily. That was a mistake. I called the number at the bottom and got routed to a junior associate named Greg. I introduced myself and asked him to cite the specific section of the Seacrest Charter that authorized fines for marine equipment on privately deeded docks. He hesitated, then said, "Our client asserts that the governing documents grant broad authority for aesthetic enforcement." "So you don't have a clause," I said. "You just hope I won't check." He tried redirecting, but I cut him off. "You're representing a client that fabricated legal authority." The PDF posted yesterday was timestamped at 3 in the morning with no signatures. That's not a meeting, that's a cover-up. Silence. I continued, "You just threatened me with legal action over an unenforceable policy. That's textbook harassment. If you persist, I'll file a complaint with the state bar." He hung up. That night, I attended the HOA's monthly meeting. I hadn't been to one in a while, but this time I brought copies printed, highlighted, and binder clipped. The room was packed, mostly retirees and middle-aged couples sipping coffee from styrofoam cups, while Regina held court at the front like a queen with a shaky crown. When it came time for open comments, I stood. "I'd like to address the special session that took place last week," I said. Regina's smile froze. "This isn't the forum for individual grievances, Mr. Nolan." "Actually, it is. According to the HOA charter, the open forum exists to hear resident concerns and allow discussion of board actions. You'd know that if you read the bylaws instead of rewriting them." A few heads turned. I held up the printed PDF. "This document was posted yesterday morning. It references a special session that never occurred, no vote, no notice, no quorum." "That's not just improper, it's illegal." Regina tried to interject, but I raised my voice, not yelling, just enough to carry. This fake session granted her enforcement powers that don't exist. Since then, she's authorized a tow attempt, hired someone to photograph private property, and threatened legal action based on fabricated rules. A man near the back stood up. "You have proof of that?" I flipped to the appendix. "All here. Screenshots, timestamps, and a notarized statement from the Harbor Patrol confirming the dock is legally zoned for private marine use." Another voice chimed in, Sandra from 3 doors down. "Wait, is that why someone was on my side yard yesterday with a camera?" "I thought it was a contractor." Regina's composure cracked. "This is all being taken out of context," I countered. "Then explain the earpiece your compliance officer was using, or the fact that the law firm you hired couldn't cite a single enforceable clause." Murmurs broke out. A few people pulled out their phones. One guy started filming, then a woman from the board, Denise, leaned into the mic. Regina, did you authorize all this without a board vote? Regina hesitated. I acted in the neighborhood's best interest. Denise turned to the others. That's not an answer. I handed Denise the binder. You'll find everything you need in there, including confirmation that Regina's actions violated both HOA bylaws and county zoning ordinances. By the end of the meeting, a motion had been introduced to suspend Regina's enforcement authority pending investigation. It passed with only one dissenting vote, hers. 2 days later, a county inspector showed up unannounced. Apparently, someone on the HOA board had forwarded my evidence. When he finished his walkthrough, he shook my hand and said, "You're in the clear." They shouldn't have gone near that dock. That same afternoon, I received a letter from the law firm, not a threat, an apology. Apparently, they were misinformed about the nature of the complaint and were withdrawing any prior communication regarding enforcement. I framed it, but the real win. 3 other neighbors stopped by over the following week, people I barely knew. They thanked me for standing up and asked if I'd help them draft letters about their own grievances with the HOA. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted, just the first to push back hard enough, and now there's talk of a recall election. The board's split, the neighborhood's waking up, and Regina, she hasn't left her porch in days. The sky had barely turned orange the following Tuesday when I noticed something odd. My mailbox was missing, not damaged, gone. The post had been yanked clean from the soil, like someone had meant business. A small crater of disturbed earth remained, surrounded by tire ruts that didn't match any vehicle I owned. I stood there, arms crossed, letting the early breeze roll off the bay. My dog, Jasper, sniffed the hole and whined, tail low. That's when I noticed the second thing. A trail of muddy boot prints led from the street straight to the side of my house, then veered around back. I followed slowly, boots crunching gravel. The motion sensor above the boathouse was tilted and the wiring had been pulled loose. Whoever had done it knew what they were targeting. I crouched just under the camera mount and saw the bolt had been unscrewed, not broken. Deliberate, methodical. That wasn't vandalism. That was someone trying not to get caught. I went inside, locked the doors, and opened the small safe in the pantry closet. My backup drive was still there, untouched. I plugged it into my laptop. The system had uploaded footage from the night before automatic. I queued it up, watching the time-stamped footage of my dock and boathouse. At 3:42 a.m., 2 figures in hooded jackets crept into frame. One carried bolt cutters. The other was shining a red flashlight with a filter infrared to avoid tripping the motion lights. They went straight for the wiring. I zoomed in, pausing frame by frame until one of them looked up briefly. It was Brady, the same guy who'd been photographing my dock. His face was clear just for a second. No mask. The second man stayed in the shadows, but his build matched someone I'd seen before at an HOA meeting, a wiry, older guy Regina once introduced as her property standards advisor. Whatever that meant. I copied the footage to a thumb drive, then called the county sheriff's office. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was attempted trespassing with tools of forced entry, possibly attempted burglary, given the path they took. The deputy on the phone didn't hesitate. He told me to stay put. By 9 that morning, a cruiser rolled up. Deputy Castellanos stepped out, a sharp-eyed woman with a badge that looked like it had seen more than one standoff. I handed her the thumb drive and explained everything, from the missing mailbox to the camera sabotage. She watched the footage on her cruiser's dash monitor and didn't blink once. "Do you know these men?" she asked, already jotting notes. I nodded. "The taller one is Brady Trent, claims to be on the HOA's compliance subcommittee. The other, I'm not sure of his name, but he's always around Regina Alder." She raised an eyebrow. "You have any reason to believe they were acting on their own?" "Doubt it. They've been escalating ever since the board suspended her." She leaned against her cruiser, thinking. If this was HOA directed, it's not just trespass. It could be conspiracy to commit a crime. And if they used HOA funds or resources, That's embezzlement. I hadn't even thought of that. She asked for copies of all the HOA memos, letters, and legal threats I'd received. I gave her a folder I'd been building since the tow truck incident. She flipped through it, nodding slowly. "I'll get a warrant for Trent's devices, and I'll talk to the county prosecutor. This could get serious fast." By noon, she was gone, and I got to work. I walked the neighborhood, knocking on doors, not with a petition, not with a speech, just with a simple question. "Has anyone been snooping around your property at night?" The answers came hesitantly at first, then they poured out. A retired couple said their shed padlock had been scratched. A single mother said her security lights had been triggered 3 nights in a row, but nothing showed on her old camera system. One guy, a commercial fisherman who kept his crab pots stacked neatly near the waterline, said he'd seen footprints near his bulkhead that weren't his. I compiled everything, time-stamped it, and sent it to Deputy Castellanos. 2 days later, the sheriff's department served a search warrant at Brady's condo. According to neighbors, they seized 3 phones, a laptop, and a stack of HOA documents that weren't supposed to leave the office. All of it was loaded into clear evidence bags and cataloged on site. That night, Castellanos called me. They found communication logs between Brady and Alder. She directed him to investigate non-compliant properties discreetly, her words. "There's also a spreadsheet with targeted addresses including yours, one column labeled priority removal." I didn't say anything for a moment. "They were making a hit list," I said finally. "Looks like it," Castellanos confirmed. "The county prosecutor's office is preparing charges. At minimum, criminal trespass and conspiracy. Possibly more, depending on where the funding came from." 3 days later, it hit the news. The local channel ran a segment titled, "Homeowners Association Under Criminal Investigation for Covert Property Surveillance and Trespass." They aired footage of the sheriff's office removing boxes from the HOA's storage unit. No one at the Seacrest HOA office gave a comment. But the story spread fast. By the weekend, the neighborhood was buzzing. Lawn chairs popped up near driveways. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves started chatting across hedges. Regina's house stayed dark. Her car hadn't moved. I heard she'd called an emergency board meeting, but less than half the members showed. Sunday afternoon, Denise, one of the board members who'd backed the motion to suspend Regina, showed up at my door. "You've got a minute?" she asked. I stepped outside. Jasper followed, tongue lolling. "The board's moving to dissolve the current enforcement committee entirely," she said. "We're drafting a new set of procedures, transparent, voted on, no more unilateral nonsense." I nodded. "Good, but that's not enough." She tilted her head. "What do you mean? There needs to be an audit." "Full financial. If HOA funds were used for any of that surveillance mess, residents deserve to know." She hesitated, then said, "We were afraid you'd say that, but you're right." The audit began the next week. The results were worse than anyone expected. Over $20,000 in unapproved security reimbursements. Dozens of invoices marked neighborhood improvement for late-night labor that didn't match any contractor on file. A private investigator hired under the name of a safety consultant. All of it linked back to Regina's office. The final blow came when the county prosecutor filed formal charges. Regina Alder was arrested for misuse of community funds, criminal conspiracy to commit trespass, and falsification of administrative records. Brady Trent was also charged, though he'd already flipped turning over phone records showing Regina had authorized the mailbox removals as a tactic to enforce compliance through inconvenience. The HOA held a special election after that. Denise was elected interim president by a landslide. The entire enforcement committee was replaced, and a new clause was added to the bylaws requiring any enforcement action to be voted on publicly with at least 3 board members present. But the best part, they invited me to help rewrite the charter. I accepted on one condition, that all residents would have access to the HOA's financial records online in real time. No more backroom spending, No more mystery invoices, just sunlight. The first thing they did under the new leadership was install a new security system funded by voluntary donations. And they asked me to help choose the cameras. I picked models with high resolution, night vision, and cloud backups. No more ripped wires, no more shadows, and my boat. Still docked where it belongs, the sun glinting off its hull like a badge of honor. No one's tried to tow it since. 2 weeks after Regina's arrest, I got a certified envelope in the mail. The seal bore the insignia of the County Superior Court. Inside was a subpoena. I sat at the kitchen table, Jasper curled under my feet as I read through the paperwork. The county prosecutor wanted me to testify at the preliminary hearing, not as a victim, but as a key witness in a broader investigation. Apparently, what had started as a local HOA mess had caught the attention of the district attorney's office. There was more. Attached to the subpoena was a letter from the county's Office of Public Integrity. It confirmed an active investigation into multiple area HOAs suspected of misappropriating funds and abusing their regulatory powers. Seacrest, thanks to the evidence I'd provided, was now the centerpiece of a case that had just expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. I called Deputy Castellanos to confirm. She answered on the first ring. "Yeah, we pulled the thread and a lot more came undone." "How deep are we talking?" I asked. Her voice was steady. Regina wasn't just misusing funds. She was coordinating with a private contractor who's already under indictment for fraud in a neighboring county. He's been selling enforcement services to HOAs up and down the coast, unregistered, uninsured, and fully off the books. "You mean Brady?" "No," she said. "Brady was a pawn. The guy behind the scenes is named Everett Moxley. Real estate background, got booted from the state licensing board 5 years ago. He's been operating under aliases, selling surveillance packages, towing contracts, even offering to manage evictions for non-compliant residents, all under the guise of HOA enforcement." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. "And Regina hired him?" She funneled payments to one of his shell companies. "It's all in the audit. We traced over $30,000 in off-ledger transfers." "Tell me she's not getting a slap on the wrist," Castellanos exhaled. "She's being charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and obstruction. Moxley's facing federal charges. If he flips, you might be testifying in front of a grand jury." I hung up and stared out the window at the bay. The water was calm. The gulls were quiet. But in my mind, a storm was still rolling. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a sandstone building with too many steps and not enough shade. I wore a charcoal suit and left my ball cap at home. Denise came, too, not as a witness, but as moral support. She'd become the reluctant face of the new board, and she wasn't backing down. Inside the courtroom, Regina looked smaller than I remembered. No pearls. No clipboard. Just a gray blazer a few sizes too large and a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Brady wasn't at the defense table. He'd already cut a deal. When I took the stand, the prosecutor started with the basics: my background, my ownership of the property, the original towing attempt. But then she shifted. "Mr. Nolan, when did you first become aware that the HOA had created a false enforcement committee?" I answered clearly. "After I received a violation notice that referenced a meeting that never occurred. I checked the public records and found no vote, no quorum, no legal authorization." She nodded. "And you documented this?" "Yes." I printed the files, preserved the metadata, and provided a notarized copy to the sheriff's department. The defense attorney objected twice, trying to frame everything as a misunderstanding. The judge overruled both. By the time I stepped down, the courtroom was silent. Regina wouldn't even look at me. The judge set a trial date for Moxley and remanded him without bail. Regina was released under strict conditions: no contact with any HOA members, no access to community records, and mandatory weekly check-ins. She shuffled out of the courtroom with her head down. Outside, Denise caught up with me. You think she really understood how far off the rails this got? She asked. I shook my head. She didn't care. She thought she was untouchable. Denise looked back at the courthouse doors. Not anymore. Life in the neighborhood changed after the hearing, not overnight, but fast enough to notice. The new board threw out the old enforcement manual entirely. A volunteer committee reviewed every past violation from the last 3 years, and more than half were overturned. Fines were refunded, late fees forgiven. And for the first time, residents were allowed to vote on proposed rule changes. The HOA's financials were posted on a public site, updated monthly. Every single expense had a receipt and a board vote. No more discretionary security expenses. No more shadow contractors. As for the dock, I installed solar-powered motion lights and 2 new cameras, not because I was afraid, because I'd learned that transparency works both ways. If they had tried dragging my boat out once, someone else might try again someday. But now the whole neighborhood had my back. One quiet Saturday, I was out by the dock checking the cleats when a man in his 60s walked up the path from the street. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm, but this time it wasn't a threat. "Xander Nolan?" he asked. "That's me." He extended his hand. "Name's Harold Beach. I'm a state compliance officer with the Department of Community Affairs. We've been reviewing HOA conduct statewide." "I wanted to thank you in person." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For making noise when it counted. This case is going to set precedent. We're drafting new legislation that'll require more oversight for HOAs, especially in waterfront zones." I didn't say anything at first. "Just watch the sun glint off the water." "You ever own an HOA home?" I asked. He chuckled. "Long time ago, lost a garden shed to an overzealous board, never forgot it." We talked for a few minutes. He asked if I'd be willing to testify in front of the State Housing Committee later in the year. I said I would. The following month, I got another letter, this one from the federal office investigating Moxley. He'd pled guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy across 6 states. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he turned over documentation that implicated 24 HOA officers across the country. Regina's name was on more than one check. Her trial came and went. She was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility and barred from holding any official position in a governing association for life. Brady got probation and mandatory ethics training, which frankly felt like a joke, but he'd already lost every ounce of credibility in the neighborhood. The Seacrest HOA, under Denise's leadership, became something new. People planted flowers without asking permission. Kids chalked up the sidewalks without getting fined. Neighbors started organizing community events, barbecues, cleanup days, even a small music night by the bay. I didn't run for the board. I didn't need to. My part was done. One evening, as I walked down to the dock with Jasper lagging behind, I noticed a couple standing near the edge admiring the sunset. They just moved into the house 2 doors down. The woman turned and waved. "Beautiful boat," she said. I smiled. "Thanks." "She's part of the view now." Her husband looked out across the water. "Hard to believe anyone ever thought it was an eyesore." I shrugged. "Some people mistake control for order." He nodded slowly. "Not anymore." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I tied off the last line on the cleat and looked back at the house. Porch light glowed. Jasper curled beside the steps. The wind carried the scent of brine and cedar. Peace finally earned.